According to a recent report by the Financial Times, wealthy people in France have started to leave the country. The number is quite significant. It began when the French demanded the wealthy fund solutions to France's financial crisis. Public opinion in France now supports higher taxes on the wealthy to address the crisis. Let's examine this further. I've made videos about this before, so many of you are likely familiar with it. Right now, France is facing such a severe fiscal crisis that it's no exaggeration to call it the biggest crisis ever. Let's start by looking at France's financial problems. By the end of Q2, France's public debt was 3.4163 trillion euros, or about 5,630 trillion won. Fiscal stability is threatened as public debt hits 115.6% of gross domestic product. Various international credit rating agencies have downgraded France's national credit rating, seeing that the country is addressing these issues only through political debates without actually solving them. In fact, President Macron tried to implement austerity measures to resolve this fiscal crisis, but he had to back down due to large-scale protests and strikes. As a result, public opinion in France shifted, leading to support for a wealth tax targeting the rich. They advocated for a 2% minimum tax on individuals with net assets over 100 million euros, about 164.5 billion won. Of France's 34 million households, only 1,800 would pay this extra tax. This means wealthy taxpayers must pay at least 2% of their net assets in taxes annually. If the amount is below 2%, they must pay extra taxes to reach at least 2%. In other words, they want to tax 2% of net assets every year. The person who proposed this idea, Gabriel Jaiwan, is. The Paris School of Economics professor expects this to generate 20 billion euros, about 33 trillion won, more in annual tax revenue. French public opinion supports this idea and urges quick implementation. Currently, 86% of French citizens, including both left and right-wing voters, support this wealth tax. Public opinion polls show rare consensus, but the issue is wealthy people in France are actually leaving the country. What was once just public debate about the wealthy leaving is now reality. As wealth tax talks intensified, France's ultra-wealthy responded quickly. The key point was requiring those with net worth over 100 million euros, about 164.5 billion won, to pay at least 2% of their assets in tax annually. This 2% tax applies to all assets, not just income, including stocks, real estate, deposits, and artwork. Basically, this means you're required to sell some assets for cash each year. Many wealthy people protested, calling it property confiscation rather than a tax. In France, most large corporation owners and heirs hold their wealth in stocks. Since their wealth is held in company shares rather than cash, they ultimately have to sell shares of the companies they run in order to pay taxes. Selling shares reduces their ownership and control, leading to a cycle of foreign capital inflow. The wealth tax was viewed not just as a way to raise funds, but as a policy that disrupted the core of the French corporate ecosystem. The Financial Times recently reported rapid outflow of French capital across borders. Analysis revealed a sharp increase in asset transfers to tax havens like Luxembourg, Switzerland, Monaco, and Belgium. Luxembourg financial authorities report French personal assets and account openings have more than doubled in 3 months, while Swiss private banks also see a surge in new French client deposits. Some wealthy French have moved or changed their family's nationality, with both people and assets relocating. They feel forced to leave their country if treated like criminals by their homeland. A symbolic figure of this trend is Bernard Arnault, the chairman of the Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy Group. He is France's richest person and consistently ranks among the world's wealthiest, with assets of about $200 billion, around 280 trillion won. Chairman Arnault criticized the recent wealth tax debate, calling it a political move to undermine the liberal economy. He strongly objected, saying if this tax passes, he'd owe about 4.7 trillion won annually, calling it a penalty, not a tax. He directly criticized Professor Gabriel Zucman of the Paris School of Economics, creator of the wealth tax, calling him a theater activist and ideological opponent of the free market. His comments sparked controversy in France, but were supported by many entrepreneurs and wealthy people. Chairman Arnault has sped up transferring assets via overseas corporations as the discussion has intensified. His actions acted as a signal. Other major French business owners, startup founders, and wealthy arts and fashion figures also started moving assets abroad one by one. When wealthy people leave like this, the country ends up facing the opposite effect. Instead of increasing tax revenue, it actually decreases. France's 46% tax burden is the highest among Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries in Europe. The fact is, nearly half of the citizens are paying almost half of their income to the state in total taxes. Raising the wealth tax further essentially means asking current taxpayers to pay more. French economic experts warn that while tax hikes may provide short-term fiscal relief, they will eventually reduce investment, jobs, and spending, hurting the economy. Still, French politicians can't drop plans to raise taxes on the wealthy, as 86% of the public supports it. Of course, we should also listen to the side that argues for the introduction of a wealth tax. They point out that the current tax structure is already designed unequally. Most developed countries have a progressive tax system, where higher incomes are subject to higher tax rates. In our country, income over 1 billion won is taxed at the top rate of 45%. However, the problem is that the wealth of the ultra-rich does not come from salaries. Their wealth mainly comes from asset appreciation, specifically company growth and rising equity value, not salary. For example, in the case of someone like Elon Musk, who owns billions of dollars worth of stock in the company he runs, he actually has little to no income and therefore pays almost no income tax. Nevertheless, Musk continues to spend lavishly and make large-scale investments freely. The secret is simple. He uses his stock as collateral for loans. These loans aren't taxed as income under tax law, and their interest rates are much lower than tax rates. In other words, the wealthy have already set up a perfect system that allows them to secure cash without paying taxes. This method works the same way in France. Most French billionaires own and hold major shares in companies they founded, gaining wealth from company value growth rather than salaries. This is where the problem arises. While the overall effective tax rate for the French population is about 52%, the average effective tax rate for billionaires is only around 27%. Focusing on the tax rate, ordinary citizens pay almost twice as much in taxes as the wealthy. As this situation continued, public dissatisfaction exploded. Ordinary citizens pay half of their income in taxes. There has been growing criticism that billionaires pay almost no taxes even as their wealth increases, and eventually the political world accepted this and began serious discussions about a wealth tax. Those in favor of introducing a wealth tax argue like this: if the rich who have no income are not taxed as they are now, tax justice will be completely undermined. In countries with high wealth inequality like France, they argue a wealth tax on the rich is needed for social balance. Statistics show France's top 1% own more assets than the bottom 50% combined. Because of this, the French people support the wealth tax not just from the perspective of economic justice, but as a matter of survival. The government can't ignore this public opinion. Therefore, this debate is not just a matter of taxes, but has turned into an ideological battle over which direction of economic justice French society will choose. France is in a tough spot and must cut its budget by about 72 trillion won. They need to find money somehow. If they introduce a wealth tax, the rich may flee, and if they implement austerity measures to cut the budget, citizens will cause an uproar and the country may fall into chaos. President Macron has no choice but to be troubled. France must address its fiscal crisis, which is now the most severe among major Western European countries. During the COVID-19 pandemic, large-scale spending was added to the burdens of an aging population, increased pension obligations, rising social security costs, and the expenses of energy transition, causing the fiscal deficit to grow to an uncontrollable level. International Monetary Fund data shows the government debt ratio will reach 129.4% by 2030, close to Greece's 130.2%. Political turmoil has worsened, with 5 prime ministers in 1 year, showing how much instability has increased. After French Prime Minister Bayrou resigned, his successor Gabriel Lecornu postponed pension reform until the next presidential election, easing political turmoil for now. However, financial issues remain unresolved. France will try to solve these problems, but they likely won't be resolved well. A major economic crisis may actually happen now due to the fiscal crisis. What are your thoughts on France's current situation and Share in the comments. That's the end of the video. Thank you.